Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're diving into a concept that has literally captivated the greatest minds in human history, the search for the unified field of the universe. Now, in the realm of physics, finding a single, elegant theory that explains absolutely everything in the cosmos is basically the holy grail. We're talking about the pursuit of one master equation that ties together the vastness of swirling galaxies and the microscopic dance of subatomic particles. But what if mainstream science has been looking in the wrong direction this entire time? Today, we're neutrally exploring a really fascinating, highly unconventional framework. We're taking a close look at a 2005 text by an author named Zhu Feng, titled The Chapter of Preaching Tao, Article 6, The Unified Field of the Universe. And we're going to unpack exactly how this text challenges the very foundations of modern physics and proposes a completely alternative cosmic theory.
The text actually hooks us right out of the gate by pointing to the heavyweights of science and the incredibly high stakes of this pursuit. You see, establishing this unified field, a simple, clear, ultimate formula applicable to absolutely everything, has been a generational dream. I mean, Albert Einstein himself spent 3 decades on this quest. Just imagine that for a second. 30 years of the most brilliant mind of the 20th century, dedicating his later life to one single mathematical prize, only to come up totally empty-handed. The author argues that scientists, both famous and obscure, have chased this glory, treating it like a purely mathematical problem to be solved on a chalkboard. But according to Zhu Feng's critique, this beautiful prospect remains an elusive mirage because of a fundamental misunderstanding of reality itself. To really understand why the text claims modern science is failing, we first need to figure out the playing field. How does this framework actually define the reality we live in?
Let's start with the playing field, defining the universe.
In this framework, the term universe represents infinite space and infinite time. Okay, fairly standard so far. But crucially, the author defines it as a composite of both material and non-material components. This essentially splits reality right down the middle. It's not just about physical matter, atoms, stars, and the things we can touch or observe through a telescope. Understanding the universe, according to this text, requires a complete acceptance that an infinite non-material world exists right alongside and interwoven with the material one. Think about how much that shifts your everyday perspective. It suggests that the unseen elements of existence are just as fundamental to the cosmos as the chair you're sitting on or the device you're using right now. This duality is the absolute bedrock of the author's entire argument. And it's exactly because of this definition that the author claims scientists looking for the unified field have made a massive fundamental error in where they're aiming their focus.
Which brings us to what the text calls a fundamental directional error.
So, the author argues that scientists uniformly focus all their attention on the material world, completely ignoring the non-material world. And the text uses a highly vivid, honestly pretty surprising metaphor to explain this error. It likens the scientific community's approach to admiring a beautiful woman's smooth, tender skin while entirely overlooking the myriad charms and graces of her inner world. In a pretty blunt comparison, the author states that scientists are definitely not masters of love when it comes to understanding the universe. Instead, they're described as being like jaded veterans lingering in a red light district, just entirely distracted by the physical and the superficial. By obsessing over the tangible, measurable aspects of matter, they completely miss the deeper, unseen essence that actually gives the universe its true character and grace. So, how does this philosophical difference actually play out in physics? Let's look at the specific mechanics and the numbers game at the heart of this framework.
Let's dive into the numbers game. 4 forces versus 8 forces.
Mainstream physics operates on the number 4. Scientists currently believe existence is governed by 4 fundamental forces: the magnetic force, the gravitational force, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force, right? The mainstream goal is to seamlessly incorporate these 4 forces into a single theoretical system. But our source text argues that physicists are deeply intoxicated by a fantasy here. The critique asserts that even if scientists somehow managed to mathematically unify these 4 forces perfectly, they still wouldn't have found the real unified field at all. They would have just created a highly sophisticated map of only half the territory, mistaking a partial victory for the ultimate truth of the cosmos.
And that leads to a massive paradigm shift in the author's theory. According to the text, the actual number of fundamental forces in the universe isn't 4, it's 8. By literally doubling the foundational rules of the universe, the framework suggests that everything we currently know about physics is really only scraping the surface. It introduces a whole new layer of cosmic machinery that operates entirely outside the bounds of traditional observation, completely reshaping what's actually required for a true unified field theory.
So, alongside the 4 mainstream forces, magnetic, gravitational, strong, and weak,
the text introduces 4 additional forces: the structural force, the repulsive force, the conscious force, and the spiritual force. The author actually makes a really compelling point here using a classic literary analogy. Unifying only the first 4 forces is compared to the Tang monk from the epic tale Journey to the West finding a false thundersound temple, rather than the true temple where the Buddha resides. You might think you've reached the ultimate destination. The math might look beautiful, the structure might seem perfectly sound, but it's an illusion of completion because you are literally missing the other 4 pillars of reality. Which naturally begs the question, if there are 4 completely hidden forces governing the universe, why in the world hasn't the mainstream scientific community noticed them?
Well, that takes us to the unmeasurable hidden forces.
The text's answer highlights a profound philosophical clash between strict mathematical materialism and this alternative framework. The author states plainly that these final 4 forces simply cannot be measured or calculated. Modern science relies entirely on mathematics, empirical evidence, and measurable data. But because these last 4 forces operate strictly in the non-material realm, they defy traditional calculation by their very nature. However, the text insists that just because we have an inability to measure something, that does not mean we can deny or ignore its existence. It argues that the absence of measurement is definitely not the absence of reality. In fact, Su Feng states that this exact reliance on measurement is the fundamental reason Einstein's 30-year effort was in vain. He was using the tools of the material world to try and capture the unmeasurable forces of the non-material world. It was never going to work.
Now, to help us grasp these unmeasurable forces, the text provides some very specific definitions. The conscious force, for example, is defined using a highly biological and somewhat unexpected analogy. It's described as a force similar to the brain's ability to make the bladder and urethra start working when one wants to urinate. It's a bit graphic, sure, but it perfectly illustrates the idea of an invisible, intentional command that instantly triggers a physical, structural response without a traditional mechanical link. It suggests that consciousness itself acts as a fundamental force of nature, capable of exerting influence and initiating action across the entire cosmic structure, entirely independent of the 4 physical forces.
Then we have the spiritual force, which the text defines as the force that causes mutual perception between things. In this alternative framework, the universe isn't just a collection of dead matter randomly bumping into itself in the dark. Instead, it is actively bound together by these non-material connections. Imagine a reality where a star and a planet, or 2 completely separate entities, actually possess a hidden capacity to perceive and react to one another on a fundamental spiritual level. This force weaves a web of unseen relationships, making the universe a highly interconnected, perceptive entity. So, if the ultimate formula can't be written on the chalkboard because half the forces are unmeasurable, how do we actually solve the unified field? Let's bring all these individual pieces together.
This brings us to the holographic universe and the Tao.
According to the text, the answer is found in the Tao of the greatest creator, which is described as a holographic system. In this holographic universe, all 8 forces, both the material and the non-material, are wonderfully incorporated into a single unified system governed by just 3 ultimate elements: consciousness, structure, and energy. These 3 elements act as the supreme organizing principles of everything. They take the physical forces, like gravity and magnetism, and they seamlessly weave them together with the non-material forces, like consciousness and spirit. The author refers to this perfect integration as Lifechanyuan's unified field theory of the universe, a grand cosmic architecture where every single tangible and intangible part plays a necessary role.
And this leads to the text's boldest and perhaps most empowering claim. The unified field isn't some future scientific discovery waiting on a multi-billion-dollar particle accelerator or some massive breakthrough in quantum computing. The text declares that the unified field is already established. It exists right now. By acknowledging the non-material world and understanding the interplay of consciousness, structure, and energy, the puzzle is solved philosophically. This completely shifts the burden of discovery away from complex machinery and places it directly onto the individual human mind. The author concludes that the only remaining task for us isn't to calculate better, but to simply work on understanding this Tao.
Which leaves us with a final, truly provocative thought from the source material. If the universe really is a holographic mix of material and non-material forces, if the unmeasurable is just as foundational to reality as the measurable, are we drastically limiting our understanding of existence by only looking at half the picture? Take a moment to just look around the room you're in right now. What invisible, unmeasurable forces might be at play shaping reality in ways our traditional science completely ignores? It's a fascinating challenge to pure materialism and a striking reminder of how different paradigms can completely reshape how we view the cosmos.
Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time as we unpack another incredible topic.